The cargo ship shook hard as it landed on the metal platform, and Marcus Cole released his grip on the controls with a long, tired breath, his eyes staring out at the alien city that spread before him like something from a dream he never asked to have a Seraphis Prime. Was the capital world of the Velthari Empire, a place of towering buildings made from living crystal that reached up toward the purple sky like frozen flames trying to touch the stars. And even after 6 months of living here, Marcus still felt like an unwelcome guest in someone else's paradise. He was 32 years old, worn down by life in ways that did not show on his face. And he had come to this distant corner of the galaxy to escape the memories that haunted him. Back on Earth, the Velthari were the rulers of this region of space, ancient beings who had built their empire while humans were still living in caves and hunting with stone tools. And they never missed a chance to remind the younger species of their place in the natural order of things. They stood almost 8 feet tall with bodies that seemed to be made of crystal and light, their skin glowing with soft colors that shifted like the northern lights on Earth, their movements graceful and slow like dancers moving through water, and their eyes burning with intelligence that came from thousands of years of civilization. Humans had been welcomed into the galactic community about 30 years ago. And by welcomed, Marcus meant that the great powers had looked at the small soft creatures from the blue planet and decided they were harmless enough to be useful for simple labor. Marcus climbed out of his ship and grabbed the delivery papers from his jacket, checking the address one more time before he started walking toward the royal district where the nobles and wealthy families made their homes. The streets were filled with aliens of many different species, tall and short and strange in ways that still surprised him sometimes. But Marcus had learned to keep his head down and walk fast, because making eye contact with the wrong person could lead to trouble he did not need. His stomach made a noise that reminded him he had not eaten anything since the day before. So he stopped at a food stand where a Velthari merchant was selling some kind of glowing fruit that looked delicious. "How much for 3 of the small ones?" Marcus asked, holding up his credit chip. The merchant looked at him like he was looking at an insect that had learned to speak, his glowing eyes narrow with disgust. "We do not serve humans here," the merchant said in a voice that dripped with contempt. "Go back to the lower districts where your kind belongs." Primitive. Marcus thought about arguing, but decided against it, because arguing never made things better. So he just nodded and walked away with his stomach still empty and his pride pushed down deep where he kept all the feelings. He could not afford to show the royal district was separated from the rest of the city by a barrier of energy that sparkled like a wall of captured starlight. And the guards at the entrance made Marcus wait for almost half an hour while they checked his credentials. Over and over again. "Just a cargo hauler," one guard said to the other without bothering to lower his voice. They let these creatures go everywhere now, even near the palace where the royal family lives. The king and his strange ideas about treating all species fairly. The other guard replied with a sound that might have been laughter. "Soon he will want them eating at noble tables." Marcus took his approved pass and walked through the barrier without saying anything. Because words were weapons he could not afford to waste on people who would never listen. The delivery itself was simple enough. Just some medical supplies for one of the noble houses. And the servant who received the cargo did not even look at Marcus as she signed the papers and waved him away like he was a machine that had finished its job. He should have gone straight back to his ship after that. He should have returned to his tiny room in the lower district and found some cheap food and slept until the next job came through the system. But there was a place nearby called the Garden of Eternal Light, and another human worker had told Marcus about it, saying it was the one place in the royal district where anyone could go without being chased away or insulted. The garden was open to all by ancient law, A gift from some king who had died long ago and believed that beauty should belong to everyone regardless of their species or status. Marcus walked through the entrance and felt his heart stop for a moment. Because even after months of seeing alien wonders, this place was something beyond words. Trees that were not really trees rose all around him. Their branches made of crystal that sang soft music when the wind touched them, filling the air with sounds that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Flowers that were not really flowers opened their petals to release clouds of glowing dust that floated through the air like tiny stars, dancing in the purple twilight paths of smooth white stone, wound through the garden like frozen rivers. And benches carved from single pieces of green stone sat beneath canopies of leaves that changed color as he watched them. Marcus found a quiet spot away from the few other visitors and sat down on the cool stone, letting the tension flow out of his body as he watched the lights dance around him. For just a moment he could pretend that he was not a failure who had run away from everything he destroyed. He could pretend that the faces of the men he had lost did not visit him every night in dreams that tasted like blood and fire. He had been a soldier once, a good one, leading a team of private military contractors on missions that governments could not officially support, until one mission had gone wrong in every way possible, and Marcus had been the only one to walk out alive. The investigation had cleared him of any wrongdoing. The payment had been deposited in his account, and Marcus had looked at his reflection in the mirror and seen nothing but a ghost wearing human skin. So he had taken the first ship leaving Earth and kept running until the running brought him here to this beautiful garden on a world where he was considered barely more than an animal. To this moment of peace that he knew could not last forever, the sound of footsteps behind him made his body go tense, because these were not normal footsteps, but the kind made by people who did not want to be heard. Quick and quiet and full of deadly purposes. Eyes snapped open and he turned his head just enough to see 4 figures in dark clothing moving through the garden toward a lone Velthari woman who sat reading near a fountain of glowing water. The woman had not noticed them approaching, but Marcus had noticed. And somewhere deep inside him, in that dark place where the soldier still lived, a voice was screaming that those 4 figures meant death and that he had about 30 seconds to decide what he was going to do about it. Marcus watched the 4 figures spread out as they moved closer to the woman, and everything about the way they moved told his trained eyes that these were professional killers who had done this many times before. They walked with a kind of control that only came from years of practice. Each step measured and silent, their bodies low and ready to explode into violence at any moment. Woman sitting near the fountain was young by Velthari standards, which probably meant she was still older than Marcus by at least 100 years. And her crystalline skin glowed with beautiful shades of blue and silver that marked her as someone important. She held some kind of reading device in her elegant hands and seemed completely lost in whatever story or report had captured her attention, totally unaware that death was creeping toward her from 4 different directions. Marcus knew he should stay where he was and pretend he had not seen anything. He knew that getting involved would only bring trouble, because this was not his world, and these were not his people, and he was just a cargo hauler who meant nothing to anyone. But the soldier inside him was already counting the angles and measuring the distances, already noticing that the killers carried strange glowing blades that hummed with a sickly green light, already calculating that the woman had maybe 15 seconds left to live if nobody did anything. Damn it all, Marcus whispered to himself. And then he was moving before he could talk himself out of, I did not run because running would alert the assassins too soon. So he walked fast and quiet across the garden at an angle that would bring him to the woman just before the killers reached her. One of the assassins noticed him and made a quick hand signal to the others, probably telling them to ignore the human because what could a soft, primitive creature do against 4 trained killers with weapons designed to cut through Velthari crystal bone like it was paper? That assumption would be their first and last mistake. Marcus reached the woman and grabbed her arm hard, pulling her off the bench and behind his body in one smooth motion that made her cry out in shock and drop her reading device on the stone path. "What do you think you are doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp with fear and anger and confusion. Marcus did not have time to answer because the assassins were already attacking. The first killer came at him with a glowing blade aimed at his throat, moving with speed that would have been impossible for any human to match. And Marcus did something the assassin clearly did not expect. Instead of jumping back to avoid the blade, he stepped forward into the attack. The weapon sliced across his shoulder, and pain exploded through his body like fire. But the wound was not as deep as it should have been because the blade was designed to pass through Velthari crystal structure, and human flesh was just different enough to resist some of its power. Marcus grabbed the assassin's weapon arm and twisted it hard until he felt bones crack and break beneath his grip. And then he drove his elbow into the killer's face with all the strength that adrenaline was pumping through his muscles. The assassin collapsed to the ground and did not move again. The other 3 hesitated for just a heartbeat, shocked by what they had witnessed. And that single moment of surprise was all Marcus needed to turn the fight in his favor. His body was flooded with chemicals that millions of years of evolution had designed for exactly this kind of situation. Chemicals that made his heart pound like a drum and his muscles burn with power and his mind go cold and clear like ice on a frozen lake. He stopped thinking because thinking was too slow for combat. He just moved on pure instinct. The second assassin stabbed at his chest, and Marcus caught the glowing blade with his bare hand, feeling it slice into his palm and not caring because pain was just information that he could deal with later when the fighting was done. And then he smashed his forehead into the assassin's face so hard that he felt the alien's skull crack against his own. 2 assassins down and 2 still standing. The third killer tried to run past Marcus to reach the woman he was protecting, and Marcus grabbed the assassin by the back of the neck and threw him into one of the crystal trees with enough force to shatter both the tree and several of the killer's bones. 3 down and 1 remaining. Last assassin stopped moving and stared at Marcus with an expression that looked very much like fear. And Marcus realized he must look absolutely terrifying right now with his body covered in blood, both alien and human, and his eyes wild with battle rage, and his chest heaving with each breath. "What are you?" the assassin whispered in a voice that trembled. Marcus did not waste time on words. He moved forward, and the assassin raised his blade to defend himself. But Marcus was faster because his body was running on reflexes that had been sharpened in combat zones across 3 different continents. Back on Earth, he knocked the weapon away with a move that shattered the assassin's wrist, then swept the killer's legs out from under him and dropped down with his knee on the alien's chest. "You are going to tell me who sent you?" Marcus growled in a voice that sounded strange and dangerous even to his own ears. "You are going to tell me everything right now." The assassin just laughed, a wet broken sound full of contempt, and then bit down on something hidden inside his mouth, some kind of poison. The killer's body shook once and then went completely still, and Marcus cursed loudly because he would get no answers from a dead man. He pushed himself back to his feet slowly, his body starting to feel the damage it had taken now that the immediate danger had passed. And he turned to look at the woman he had just saved from death. She was staring at him with eyes that glowed like captured stars, her mouth hanging open, her body pressed against the fountain like she was trying to disappear into the stone. Are you hurt anywhere? Marcus asked, and his voice came out softer and gentler than he expected it, but she shook her head slowly from side to side, still staring at him like he was some kind of monster or angel, or maybe both things at once. Who are you? She asked in barely more than a whisper. Nobody important, Marcus replied. Just a cargo hauler making deliveries. You just killed 3 assassins with nothing but your bare hands, she said, her voice rising with something between terror and amazement. You caught a phase blade with your hand, and you were still standing, and you call yourself nobody important? Marcus looked down at his palm, where the blade had cut deep into his flesh, blood dripping freely onto the white stone path beneath his feet. And he thought that he should probably be feeling a lot more pain than he was, but the adrenaline was still rushing through his body like liquid fire. I used to be a soldier, he said. A long time ago, in what feels like another life. The sound of many boots striking stone made them both turn their heads, and Marcus saw royal guards flooding into the garden from every entrance with their weapons raised and ready and their faces grim. Princess, one of the guards shouted, and Marcus felt his stomach drop like a stone falling into deep water as he suddenly understood exactly who he had just saved, the woman trembling. Behind him was not just some noble lady who liked to read in public. Garden, she was Princess Lyra Veth Seranis, the beloved youngest daughter of King Aldrin Ix himself, heir to one of the largest fortunes in the entire galaxy. Oh no, Marcus said very quietly. The guards surrounded him in a circle with weapons aimed at his head, shouting commands in a language he could not understand. And his exhausted body chose that exact moment to remind him that he had lost a dangerous amount of blood. The world tilted sideways like a ship in a storm. The princess was shouting something at the guards, maybe telling them not to shoot, but her voice seemed very far away, like she was speaking from the other end of a long tunnel. Marcus fell to his knees on the blood-stained stone, and the last thing he saw before darkness swallowed him was the princess pushing past her guards to kneel beside him, her glowing eyes filled with something that might have been genuine concern for the strange, violent human who had saved her life. Marcus woke up slowly like a man swimming up from the bottom of a deep, dark ocean, his mind foggy and confused as he tried to remember where he was and what had happened to him. The first thing he noticed was that he was lying in the most comfortable bed he had ever felt in his entire life, soft as clouds and warm as sunlight, surrounded by walls that glowed with gentle golden light. The second thing he noticed was the quiet humming of machines nearby that seemed to be watching his body and keeping track of his heartbeat and breathing. For a long moment he just lay there staring at the ceiling and trying to put the pieces of his memory back together. And then everything came rushing back in a flood of images, sensations. The garden with its crystal trees and glowing flowers, the 4 assassins moving like shadows through the purple twilight, the fight and the blood and the pain and the woman. He had saved the Princess. Marcus tried to sit up quickly but gentle. Hands pushed him back down onto the soft bed. Please, do not move yet, a calm voice said. Your body has been through great trauma, and you need more time to heal properly. Marcus looked up at the Velthari healer standing beside his bed, a tall, graceful figure dressed in flowing white robes that seemed to move like water around her crystalline body. Where am I right now? He asked, his voice rough and dry like he had not used it in a long time. You are in the Royal Medical Wing inside the palace, the healer answered, and there was something in her voice that sounded almost like respect. You have been sleeping for 3 days while we worked to repair your injuries. 3 entire days. Marcus closed his eyes and let that information sink into his tired brain, trying to understand how his life had changed so completely in such a short amount of time. He was lying in a bed inside the royal palace. Marcus Cole, the failed soldier and lonely cargo hauler, who was considered barely more than an animal by most of the people on this world, was being treated like an honored guest in the home of the most powerful family in this entire region of the galaxy. "The princess," he said, opening his eyes again. "Is she safe and unharmed?" The healer's expression shifted into something that almost looked like a smile. "Princess Lyraveth is completely unharmed thanks to what you did," she said. "She has come to visit you many times while you were sleeping, and she will be very happy to learn that you are finally awake." Before Marcus could say anything in response, the door to his room slid open with a soft sound and several people entered, led by a Velthari woman whose crystalline skin glowed with the same beautiful shades of blue and silver he remembered from the Garden Princess. Lyraveth Saranish was even more beautiful than he remembered. Tall and graceful with eyes that sparkled like diamonds filled with starlight. Dressed in elegant robes of deep purple that showed her royal status to everyone who saw her. Behind her came several guards and what looked like important advisors or government officials, all of them watching Marcus with expressions that ranged from curious interest to open suspicion. "You are finally awake," the princess said, and there was warmth in her voice that surprised him. "I was starting to worry that you might never open your eyes again." Marcus managed to sit up this time, though his body complained with aches and pains that told him the healing process was far from complete. "Your Highness," he said, not entirely sure what the proper way to address alien royalty was, but hoping that would be good enough. "I hope I did not cause too much trouble for you or your family." The princess laughed, a sound like crystal bells ringing in a gentle wind. "Trouble?" she said with amusement dancing in her glowing eyes. "You killed 3 of the most deadly assassins in the entire empire using nothing but your bare hands, and you ask if you caused trouble?" She moved closer to his bed, and Marcus noticed that the guards behind her tensed up, but did not try to stop her. "You saved my life," she said, her voice softer and more serious now. "The Shadow Veil has never failed to kill their target before. Not once in 500 years of carrying out assassinations. And you stopped them by yourself while you had no weapons and no armor." Marcus did not know what to say to that, so he just stayed silent. "The entire empire is talking about you now," the princess continued. "They are calling you the human cargo hauler who fights like a demon from the old stories and bleeds like any normal creature, but simply refuses to fall down and die." "I just did what needed to be done in that moment," Marcus said. "Anyone else would have done the exact same thing if they had been there." "No," the princess said firmly. "They would not have, because the Velthari mind does not work the way your human mind does. We freeze up when faced with sudden unexpected violence. We cannot process what is happening and react in just seconds the way you did." She paused and looked at him with those beautiful glowing eyes. "My father wants to meet with you," she said. "King Aldrin Ix himself wishes to speak with the human who saved his youngest daughter from death." Marcus felt something cold settle into his stomach like a ball of ice. "That does not sound like a good thing for me," he said. The princess smiled again, and this time there was kindness in it. "My father is very old and very wise and can be quite frightening when he wants to be," she admitted. "But he's also fair in his judgments, and he never forgets when someone does something good for him or his family." One of the advisors stepped forward then. A tall Velthari with skin like polished silver and cold eyes that held no warmth or friendliness at all. "The king has declared a life debt," the advisor announced in a stiff, formal voice. "This is an ancient sacred bond that ties the royal house to you until the debt has been properly repaid. This is not a small matter, human, and you would be wise to approach it with all the respect and seriousness it deserves." Marcus looked from the unfriendly advisor to the kind princess and back again. "A life debt," he repeated slowly. "What exactly does that mean for me?" "It means," the princess said before the advisor could answer, "that my father owes you something precious. because you gave me something precious, which was my life. And he will not be able to rest peacefully until that debt has been properly balanced." She reached out and touched his hand gently, and Marcus felt warmth spread through his fingers where her cool crystalline skin met his rough, human flesh. "Can you stand up and walk?" she asked. Marcus tested his legs carefully and found that they could hold his weight, though not without some complaint from his injured muscles. "I can walk," he confirmed. "Then come with me," she said. "It is time for you to meet my father, the king." The walk through the palace was like walking through the most beautiful dream Marcus had ever had, with hallways of crystal and light that seemed to stretch on forever in every direction, filled with art and wonders that he could not even begin to understand. Everywhere he went, people stopped what they were doing and stared at him, their glowing eyes following the human who walked beside their princess like he actually belonged there. Finally, they reached a door that was larger than any door Marcus had ever seen in his life, carved from a single piece of some dark material that seemed to swallow light instead of reflecting it. "The throne room," the princess said quietly. "My father waits for you inside." The massive doors swung open without making any sound, and Marcus looked into a chamber that made everything else he had seen look small and ordinary by comparison. The throne room was enormous beyond belief, with a ceiling so impossibly high that it disappeared into shadow above them and walls that glowed with slowly moving patterns of light that told stories Marcus could not read or understand. At the far end of this vast space, sitting upon a throne carved from pure white crystal, was King Aldrin X, ruler of the Valthari Empire. Even from this great distance, Marcus could feel raw power radiating from the ancient king, a presence that pressed against his mind like the weight of mountains and centuries combined. The king was old, older than anything Marcus had ever seen or imagined, and his crystalline skin had darkened over the ages to a deep blue that was almost black, shot through with veins of bright gold that pulsed with inner light like a heartbeat. His eyes were like twin suns burning with intelligence and authority and something else that Marcus could not find a name for. "Come forward," the king commanded, and his voice filled the entire chamber like rolling thunder. "Let me look upon the human who saved my beloved child." Marcus walked forward on legs that suddenly felt weak and unsteady, with the princess beside him and the weight of the entire royal court watching his every single step. When Marcus reached the bottom of the steps that led up to the great throne, he stopped walking and did what felt right in that moment, dropping to one knee and bowing his head before the ancient king who ruled over billions of lives. "Stand up," King Aldrin commanded after a moment of heavy silence. "I wish to see your face properly." Marcus rose to his feet and forced himself to meet the burning eyes of the king. And for a long stretch of time that seemed to last forever, neither of them spoke a single word. "You are smaller than I expected you to be," the king finally said, his voice rumbling through the vast chamber, "and softer looking, and by every appearance weaker than even a Valthari child who has barely learned to walk." He leaned forward on his throne, his ancient eyes studying Marcus like he was some fascinating puzzle that needed to be solved. "And yet, you killed 3 Shadow Veil assassins in mere seconds and very nearly captured a 4th one alive for questioning. So tell me, human, how is such a thing even possible?" Marcus took a deep breath and decided that honesty was probably his best option. "I was trained for violence from a very young age, Your Majesty," he said. "And when my body senses danger, it produces chemicals that make me stronger and faster and much more resistant to pain than I would normally be. Adrenaline," the king said. And Marcus was surprised that he knew the word. "Yes. I have spent many years studying your species from a distance. You humans are prey animals who somehow evolved to become predators as well, carrying both sets of instincts inside your blood." The king smiled, and it was not an expression that made Marcus feel any safer. "I have a demand to make of you, Marcus Cole," he announced in a voice loud enough for everyone in the court to hear clearly. And you will hear it now in front of my entire court as witnesses. Marcus braced himself for whatever was coming, half expecting to be told to leave the planet and never return, or perhaps to be punished for daring to lay his primitive hands on a member of the royal family. What actually happened was something he never could have predicted in 1,000 years. You will become the shield of my daughter, the king declared. Our personal guardian sworn to protect her life above all other things. You will go where she goes and stand between her and any danger that threatens her. Whispers broke out among the watching nobles and advisors. But the king was not finished speaking. Furthermore, he continued, raising his voice to silence the murmurs. You will train my royal guards in human methods of fighting and combat. You will teach them whatever skills and techniques allowed you to defeat assassins who had never known failure in 500 years of killing. The whispers became louder and angrier, and one voice rose above all the others. This is absolutely outrageous. A Velthari, wearing a military uniform covered in medals and decorations, pushed his way through the crowd. His crystalline face twisted with fury, and his body radiating barely controlled rage. I am General Kethrum, Supreme Commander of all royal military forces, he announced loudly. And I will not stand here silently while you suggest that my elite warriors need training from some primitive creature who probably cannot even read simple words. The king turned his burning gaze upon the general, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Your elite warriors failed completely to protect my daughter, the king said, his voice cold as ice in winter. They arrived too late to stop the assassination attempt. And if not for this so-called primitive creature, my daughter Lyraveth would be dead right now. The general's face darkened with shame, but he did not back down from his position. One lucky encounter does not make this human qualified to train soldiers who have been perfecting their skills for centuries, he argued stubbornly. This is an insult to our proud traditions and our sacred honor as warriors. Honor does not stop blades from cutting flesh, the king replied sharply. And traditions did not save my daughter from the assassins. But he did. He turned his attention back to Marcus, and his expression softened just slightly. I will speak honestly with you, human, he said. I have been watching your species carefully for many years now, and I have long suspected that the galaxy has badly underestimated what humans are truly capable of doing. The king rose from his throne and began walking in a slow circle around Marcus, studying him from every angle like he was examining a rare and valuable artifact. Your bodies produce chemicals that dramatically enhance your performance during moments of crisis and danger. You can ignore injuries that would completely incapacitate any Velthari warrior. You heal from wounds much faster than we do. And you adapt to new and unexpected situations with a speed that seems almost impossible. He stopped directly in front of Marcus and looked down at him with those ancient burning eyes. But most importantly of all, you humans are utterly unpredictable. Your minds do not follow logical patterns or predictable paths. You make split-second decisions based on pure instinct and raw emotion that no rational being could ever hope to anticipate ahead of time. The king began pacing again as he continued to speak. The Shadow Veil spent years preparing for this assassination. They studied every patrol pattern of my guards. They designed their weapons specifically to kill Velthari. They planned for every possible problem they might encounter. He stopped and pointed directly at Marcus. But they did not prepare for you, because nobody ever prepares for humans. Because until this very moment, nobody in the galaxy believed that humans were important enough to prepare for. Marcus did not know how to respond to any of this. So he spoke the simple truth that was in his heart. Your Majesty, I am deeply honored by your words and by your offer. But I am not the man you seem to think I am. He took a shaky breath as the weight of his past pressed down upon him. I was a soldier back on Earth, leading a team on a mission that went completely wrong. And I was the only survivor. I ran away from my home and from all my responsibilities because I could not face what I had allowed to happen. His voice dropped lower as shame filled him. I am not a hero, Your Majesty. I am a coward who simply got lucky one time in a garden. Princess Lyraveth stepped forward then, her voice clear and strong and filled with conviction. You are completely wrong about yourself, she declared. I watched you in that garden with my own eyes. You did not hesitate for even one single second. You saw danger coming toward me, and you moved to stop it without any thought at all for your own safety or survival. She came to stand beside him and looked up at her father. That is not cowardice, father, she said firmly. That is courage so deep and so natural that it has become pure instinct. The king nodded his head slowly in agreement. My daughter speaks great wisdom, he said. Perhaps you did run from your past. Perhaps you did flee from pain and guilt and shame. But when the moment came to run again, you chose to stand and fight instead. He placed one hand on Marcus's shoulder. And despite the king's great size, his touch was surprisingly gentle. That choice is who you truly are, Marcus Cole. Not the man who ran away, but the man who chose to stay and fight. The king lowered his voice so that only Marcus and the princess could hear his next words. There is another reason I am making this demand of you, he said quietly. Someone inside my own court arranged that assassination. Someone very close to me betrayed my daughter to the Shadow Veil. His eyes burned with cold fury. I cannot trust my own people to properly investigate this betrayal, but I can trust you, because you have no connections here and no alliances and no reason to lie to me about anything. His grip on Marcus's shoulder tightened just slightly. Find a traitor for me. Protect my daughter while you search for the truth, and teach my guards to be better warriors. Do all of these things and the life debt between us will be fully repaid. Marcus looked at the ancient king, then at the princess who stood beside him with hope glowing in her beautiful eyes. And somewhere deep inside himself, he felt something change forever. I accept your demand, he said. But I have one condition of my own. The watching court gasped at the incredible boldness of a human making demands of their king. But Aldrin simply raised one eyebrow with what might have been amusement. Speak your condition, then. I need complete access to everyone who was involved in the princess's security on the day of the attack. Marcus said, I need authority to question anyone I choose without interference from nobles or officials. And I need the power to follow this investigation wherever it leads, even if it leads to very powerful people who would prefer not to be questioned. The king was silent for a long moment. And then he smiled. You bargain like a Valthari merchant in a trading hall, he said. Very well, Marcus Cole. You shall have everything you have asked for. I will issue the official orders before this day is finished. He raised his voice once again to address the entire watching court. Let it be known throughout the Empire that Marcus Cole of Earth is now shield to Princess Lyraveth, carrying all the rights and responsibilities and privileges that sacred title has always held. Any being who harms him or interferes with his duties will answer directly to me and to my judgment. The entire court bowed as one, including General Kethran. Though the general's bow was stiff and his cold eyes promised that there would be difficult days ahead, Marcus had made a powerful enemy today. But he had also been given something he thought he had lost forever, a purpose worth fighting for. The weeks that followed were the hardest and most satisfying of Marcus's entire life. As he threw himself completely into his new duties with an energy and focus that surprised even himself, training the royal guards turned out to be like trying to teach birds how to swim underwater, because the Valthari had spent so many centuries depending on their advanced technology and their superior crystalline bodies that they had completely forgotten how to truly fight with raw skill and instinct. You are all far too predictable in everything you do, Marcus told them during one of the first training sessions, walking in circles around a group of elite warriors who watched him with barely hidden contempt in their glowing eyes. You attack using patterns that can be memorized. You defend using patterns that can be exploited. Everything you do follows strict rules that any intelligent enemy can study and learn to defeat. He pointed directly at General Catherine, who had been ordered to attend these sessions by the king himself. Despite his strong objections, your general announces his strikes 3 full seconds before he actually makes them. Marcus said bluntly, I could defeat him in combat with my eyes completely closed. The general's face twisted. With rage at this insult, then prove it human. He growled through clenched teeth. Marcus smiled calmly and closed his eyes. General, Catherine attacked with all the considerable speed and power that his ancient warrior's body could produce, and Marcus simply stepped aside from each strike by listening carefully to the sounds of movement and feeling the subtle changes in air pressure around him. When the general overreached on a powerful thrust, Marcus grabbed his extended arm and used the Velthari's own forward momentum to throw him tumbling across the training room floor. The watching guards fell completely silent. Unpredictability, Marcus said as he opened his eyes again. That is what I am going to teach all of you. How to fight in ways that are dirty and unfair and impossible for any enemy to predict or prepare for. Over the following weeks, he taught them human combat techniques that seemed almost primitive and crude compared to their elegant traditional martial arts. But these rough methods proved to be devastatingly effective in actual combat. He showed them how to feint and deceive their opponents, how to attack from unexpected angles that seemed impossible, how to use pain and fear and confusion as weapons against those who would try to harm them. He taught them that there was no such thing as a fair fight, that the only fights that mattered were the ones you won and the ones you lost. Slowly and grudgingly, the guards began to develop genuine respect for their human instructor. And even General Catherine privately admitted after several weeks that the strange methods Marcus taught had real value on the battlefield. But Marcus never once forgot about his other equally important task. Every single day, he continued investigating the assassination attempt on the princess, following trails of evidence that led him through the darkest and most secret corners of Velthari political society. He questioned nobles and servants and merchants and soldiers, using his human instincts to detect the tiny signs of lies and hidden truths that the logical Velthari mind simply could not recognize. He noticed patterns and connections that others completely missed. Relationships that seemed random to everyone else but felt deeply wrong to his pre-evolved human brain. And slowly, piece by careful piece, a picture began to take shape in his mind. Lord Vesson was one of the king's oldest and most trusted advisors, a silver-skinned noble who had faithfully served at the royal family for over 300 years. Without any hint of scandal or betrayal, he was also secretly a dangerous fanatic who believed with all his heart that humans were a disease that would contaminate and corrupt the pure Velthari bloodlines if they were ever granted too many rights or freedoms. The king's recent proposal to expand the rights of humans living in the empire had finally pushed Vesson past the breaking point of his sanity, and he had arranged the assassination of the princess while planning to blame it on human extremists, hoping this would turn the entire empire against Marcus's species forever. Marcus gathered all of his evidence and brought it to the king in a private meeting, laying out each piece of the puzzle in a report that was thorough and completely impossible to deny. I trusted him completely, King Aldrin said, his voice heavy with the weight of betrayal. He stood beside me for 300 years as a loyal friend and advisor. And all that time he was hiding a heart full of poison and hatred. Hatred often hides itself very well. Marcus replied quietly, especially in people who have become experts at wearing masks to conceal their true feelings. The king was silent for a long moment, then nodded his ancient head with determination. "We will create a trap to catch him," he decided. "The ceremony of stars takes place next week. We will make it appear that my daughter is vulnerable and unprotected. And when Vesen's assassins try to strike again, we will be ready and waiting for them." The ceremony of stars was the most important celebration of the Velthari year, a grand festival that brought together nobles and important guests from every corner of the vast empire in a massive display of wealth and power and cultural pride. Marcus spent every single day leading up to the ceremony preparing his guards for what was coming, drilling them relentlessly in the techniques he had taught them, until they could perform them perfectly, even while half asleep. When the night of the ceremony finally arrived, the great hall of the palace blazed with light as thousands of guests filled the enormous space, their crystalline bodies glowing like living jewels scattered across a sea of silk and precious metals. Princess Lyraveth stood near the center of the crowded room, looking completely alone and undefended, the perfect tempting target for anyone who might be watching and waiting for an opportunity to strike. Marcus waited hidden in the shadows with his body coiled tight with anticipation and his senses stretched out to their absolute limits. He spotted them before anyone else did. 12 figures wearing servant uniforms moving through the oblivious crowd with that same predatory grace he remembered so vividly from the garden weeks ago. Now, he whispered quietly into the communication device hidden in his collar. The trap closed shut like the jaws of a hungry beast. Marcus exploded out of the shadows and crashed into the nearest assassin, taking the killer down with a brutal combination of strikes that left the attacker unconscious before his body even hit the polished floor all around him. His trained guards threw off their disguises and engaged the remaining assassins using techniques that no Velthari warrior had ever used before. In all of recorded history, they feinted and dodged and fought without any rules or honor, using furniture as weapons and attacking vulnerable areas that traditional combat codes considered forbidden targets. The assassins had prepared carefully for traditional Velthari fighting styles. They were completely unprepared for 12 guards who had learned to fight like savage humans from a primitive death world. The battle was violent and brutal and surprisingly short, ending with every single assassin either dead or captured in restraints, and not one of the royal guards suffering a fatal wound. Marcus himself personally took down 5 of the killers, moving through the chaos of battle like a force of nature that could not be stopped or slowed. His human body flooded with adrenaline and his trained mind finding weaknesses in every enemy he faced. When the fighting was finally over, he stood in the center of the great hall covered in blood that was mostly not his own, breathing hard and fast and feeling more alive and present than he had felt in years. Lord Vesen tried desperately to flee the scene, but General Catherine caught him at the main door, using a leg sweep technique that Marcus had personally taught him just 5 days earlier. "You are under arrest for high treason against the crown," Catherine announced in a voice filled with grim satisfaction. "And I want you to know that a human helped me capture you tonight." Later that same night, after the wounded had been treated and the prisoners had been secured in the deepest cells, King Aldrin Ix addressed his assembled court. "Tonight you have witnessed something truly remarkable," he declared, his powerful voice filling the great hall completely. "You have seen Velthari warriors fighting like humans and winning against impossible odds. You have learned that the species we foolishly dismissed as primitive savages actually has a great deal to teach us about survival." He gestured for Marcus to approach the throne. Marcus Cole came to our world as an anonymous cargo hauler. nameless and ignored and treated with contempt by nearly everyone he encountered. The king continued, "Today, I declare him to be Lord Marcus Cole, the first human noble in all of Velthari history, with all the rights and lands and privileges and responsibilities that sacred title carries." The court erupted in thunderous applause, and Marcus felt heat rise to his face as embarrassment and pride battled inside his chest. He had never wanted glory or recognition or titles, but as he looked around at the guards who had once mocked him and now cheered his name with genuine respect, at General Catherine, who nodded at him with warrior's admiration, at Princess Lyraveth, who watched him with eyes full of warmth and something deeper that he was almost afraid to name, he realized that he had finally found what he had been searching for without even knowing a purpose that gave his life meaning, a home where he truly belonged, the place where being human